I originally became interested in learning about Iver Johnson Company when I discovered their bicycles. I've been a collector of Fitchburg memorabilia for many years, and I've always enjoyed bicycles. It seemed logical to me that a bicycle made in Fitchburg would be a fantastic piece of local history to own. So I started to seek them out, but I always wanted to learn a little bit more about the company that made them. The more research I did, the more facts I uncovered, and the deeper I dug into the company's history, the more overwhelmed and astonished I became of its enormity and its reach. I'm confident that by the end of this presentation, you'll be astonished as I was, and how one man, Iver Johnson, and his company was able to accomplish so much. This is the story of a Norwegian immigrant who lived the American dream. Iver Johnson, son of John Johnson, was born February 14, 1841, on his family's farm and homestead in Nordfjord, Norway. He spent all of his early years on the farm, a property that for centuries was simply passed on generation to generation from fathers to sons. Family members lived, worked, and died there, rarely venturing much further. Young Iver was accustomed from childhood to hard labor and long hours. It was the way of life for his family. Young Iver did his part and was an ambitious boy. Iver's hometown of Nordfjord, Norway, is a beautiful small fishing and farming village on the northern end of a fjord. The town is blessed with beautiful scenery, deep clear fjords and lakes, and spectacular mountain peaks, beautiful glaciers, and year-round alpine skiing. However, as beautiful as it was, young Iver was determined to leave the family farm and seek his fortune in a trade where even longer hours were required. But the opportunities were much greater. At the age of 16, his family sent him to the town of Bergen, where he was apprenticed to a gunsmith. Here, he was required to be in the shop from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. during the summer months, and from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. during the winter. His educational opportunities were limited, amounting to about 3 months of the year while in his hometown, supplemented by instruction in Sunday school. Having finished his apprenticeship in 1862, young Iver became a journeyman and was employed for 1 year in the small town of Christiania, known today as Oslo. Upon entering the trade, he was successful in opening his own gun shop in Norway's capital city, Oslo. Determined to seek his fortune across the Atlantic, he came to the United States in 1863, landing in Boston on June 26, just 22 years old, with a suitcase and a dream. He had no problem immigrating to the United States back then because he had a desirable skill. He was a trained gunsmith. Young Iver heard stories of great firearm shops in Worcester, so his sights were set on that city on hopes of securing a job in his trade. Because the United States was engaged in a great civil war at that time, there was a growing demand for his gun-making skills, and young Iver immediately found employment at the Allen and Wheelock firearm factory. For 8 years, he was employed in this Worcester gun shop, during which time he saved his wages, became familiar with the language, and learned the ways and manners of his new country. One day, while walking down a Worcester street with a friend, Iver noticed a pretty girl walking towards them with a shawl draped over her shoulders, and her face partially concealed with a bonnet. Always the gentleman, Iver bowed to the woman, but she simply ignored him. Iver looked to his companion and said, "You have just seen the future Mrs. Johnson." Iver's friend let out a huge bellowing laugh and informed him that that girl was Mary Elizabeth Spears, daughter of one of the wealthiest men in town. and furthermore, she was engaged. Nevertheless, on April 9, 1868, Iver Johnson married Mary Spears, and they would eventually have 3 sons, Frederick, John, and Walter, and 2 daughters, Mary Louise and Nellie. In 1871, Iver left the Allen and Wheelock Company and started in business for himself in partnership with another Norwegian immigrant, Martin By, under the name of Johnson By and Company. With their savings and good credit as capital, they started their business in a single room in a building on 19 Church Street in Worcester. Johnson By and Company became successful and profitable as demand for low-cost firearms increased. This is an example of an early Iver Johnson & By single-shot pistol called the Smoker. Johnson & By pistols were well made, with designs, features, and innovations that other companies copied. Their pistols were inexpensive and of very good quality. Fashion grew for these single-shot pocket pistols, which became very popular with the general public, and especially with gamblers. These pistols were nicknamed suicide specials, because if you missed with your one and only shot, there may be no mercy from your adversary. Early on in business, both Iver Johnson and Martin By understood that they needed a way to market and distribute their products if they wanted to enjoy continued growth. Martin By had a good friend, John Lovell, who owned the John P. Lovell Arms Company in Boston. The Lovell Arms Company did a massive business in wholesaling, retailing, importing, and distributing the firearms and sporting goods of many different companies. And they also had a huge mail order following. In 1881, Johnson & By signed an exclusive contract with the Lovell Arms Company to market all of their products. After 2 years, Johnson & By outgrew their space and relocated to a building on Central Street known as the Armsbury Building. Here, they rented 2 rooms and employed 50 people. After another 2 years, Johnson & By purchased the building, and as business continued to grow, they expanded their business to the entire building. In 1883, Mr. Johnson bought the interest of his partner, Martin By, and the business was thereafter conducted under the name Iver Johnson Arms. Mr. Johnson was an innovative genius and was very successful in creating new and improved features for firearms and later for bicycles, which he had covered by U.S. patents. He did all kinds of drop forging, polishing, and nickel plating, and was constantly devising new machines and implements for the market, using only the best machinery in his factory. His goods were steadily becoming well known throughout the country, and he soon found it necessary to expand his presence in Canada and in Mexico. In 1885, the manufacture of bicycles was begun directly from the designs of Iver Johnson. A year later, the product amounted to 1,000 bicycles a year, and within 5 years, bicycle production increased to 15,000 a year, partly fueled by the turn-of-the-century bicycle craze. Along with his firearms, Iver Johnson bicycles were beginning to command a significant share of their business. To give you some insight into just how popular the bicycle craze was at the turn of the century, this photograph shows enthusiasts from local bicycle clubs gathered at the spring meet of the League of American Wheelmen in Worcester. Along with his firearms, present at this meet were a group from the city of Fitchburg called the Fitchburg Wheelmen. Cycling was always popular in Fitchburg, and there were numerous bicycle clubs in the area. This image shows the Fitchburg Cycle Club at about the turn of the century. This picture shows the Rollstone Cycle Club at about the same time. Here, the members are enjoying some cigars and a few drinks before a local event. Here are the same members of the Rollstone Cycle Club with some of their guests, assembled for a group photograph right in the upper common. The Rollstone Cycle Club was especially active in local parades and other celebrations. This club took their involvement with the community quite seriously, as we can gather from this 1893 notice to members that read, "Members are expected to meet at the club at 4:30 a.m. sharp on Memorial Day, with uniform to consist of a white sweater with emblem on front, a cap with a 4-inch visor and emblem on top, knee breeches and black stockings." You can be fairly sure that many of the local cyclists rode Iver Johnson wheels, if only because the company had a substantial presence in the city. Iver Johnson's son, Frederick, was a huge cycling enthusiast himself and was captain of the Fitchburg Cycle Club and a member of the Rollstone Cycle Club. This vintage photograph shows the Rollstone Cycle Club posing for a photo during one of their outings. As the business continued to grow, so did the demand for space, and by 1891, the business had outgrown its Worcester location. Iver Johnson heard through a close personal friend of his of an available and very desirable manufacturing space in the growing and business-friendly town of Fitchburg. Iver traveled to Fitchburg to evaluate the facility, and after listening to some encouraging words from his friend, made an offer to purchase the entire site of the Walter Hayward Chair Manufacturing Company on River Street. In late 1891, Iver Johnson moved his entire company to this Fitchburg location. This vintage photo shows exactly how the complex appeared when Iver Johnson purchased it. Iver Johnson's encouraging friend in Fitchburg was none other than David M. Dillon of the Dillon Boiler Works, a very well-known and successful Fitchburg businessman. David M. Dillon was directly responsible for bringing the Iver Johnson Company to the city of Fitchburg. This is an example of a set of antique cast iron D.M. Dillon boiler doors. On this site, and with additions, Iver Johnson constructed one of the largest industrial institutions ever seen in the city of Fitchburg. The Iver Johnson Arms and Cycle Works would now occupy 5 brick buildings and several wooden ones, with a floor space of some 200,000 square feet, equipped with all the modern appliances and machinery. Expert and skilled mechanics and metallurgists were employed, and laboratories were maintained for chemical and mechanical testing. This manufacturing facility was the largest of its type at that time in the entire world. With large retail stores in Fitchburg, Worcester, and Boston, and massive wholesale depots in New York, San Francisco, St. Paul, and branches in England, Germany, and Australia, they would cover practically the entire world. The company was now in a position to meet all challenges, and everywhere it was known that the company lives up to its motto of the founder, honest goods at honest prices. It was fashionable at the turn of the century for manufacturers to have lithographs made of their factories and distribute them to their associates. As a matter of fact, one still hangs in the office of Kelly Wood Products, located towards the rear of this complex. You can be absolutely certain that one of these lithographs hung in Iver Johnson's office, located in the building to the far right, directly facing River Street. This framed example, owned by a local collector, could very well be that one. At the same time that Iver Johnson was equipping his new manufacturing facility on River Street, he was also looking for a suitable new home in Fitchburg. He purchased this beautiful Victorian home on 131 Highland Avenue that still stands today. This house today is known as the President's House, and Fitchburg State University owns it. In 1894, Iver Johnson added a complete line of sporting goods to its firearms and bicycle line, and in the same year, opened a bicycle and sporting goods store on Main Street in Fitchburg. One thing you have to admit, they had great-looking stationery, front and back. Their new products would now include tennis rackets, skis, snowshoes, ice skates, baseball, basketball, and track uniforms, fly fishing rods, golf clubs, canoes, toboggans, and gym equipment of every imaginable type. If it was sports-related, Iver Johnson carried it. They would attach their name to every product they sold, right down to and including a line of whistles. Unfortunately, by 1895, illness prevented Iver Johnson from spending much time at his factory, as he could barely move unaided. He was carried outdoors occasionally to take short carriage rides in a carriage he had specially built with cushioned tires. During this time, he spent little time at the River Street factory, and the day-to-day management was being handled by Iver's son, Frederick. After just 3 years in his new Fitchburg home and facility, and 33 years in his new country, Iver Johnson died of tuberculosis at his Highland Avenue home. The afternoon of August 3rd, 1895. He was 54 years old. His lengthy obituary in the August 5th, 1895 Fitchburg Sentinel stated, Iver Johnson, head of the great bicycle and firearms manufacturing company of Iver Johnson and Company, died Saturday afternoon after quite a long illness of consumption. A generous and philanthropic citizen, Mr. Johnson was ever ready to promote the welfare of his fellow men. Iver's Fitchburg home was flooded with letters of condolences from all corners of the world. His body was transported to Worcester's Hope Cemetery by a special parlor car, and he is buried at the Mount Auburn Cemetery in Worcester, Mass. Iver Johnson's oldest son, Frederick, just 22 years old and the exact same age as Iver Johnson when he came to this country, took over as the company's president and would remain in that position until 1909. Iver's widow, Mary, became president of all retail stores and trustee and operator of the Iver Johnson Sporting Goods Company in Fitchburg. Despite Fred's ability, his mother, Mary Elizabeth, kept all of the company's finances in her name. As the years passed by, the companies enjoyed uninterrupted prosperity and growth. The ideas of the founder were extended, developed, and promoted, and the business grew steadily in all directions. At the time of Iver Johnson's death, his firm employed 800 local workers and had over 200,000 square feet of manufacturing space, the largest employer in Fitchburg at that time. It is interesting to note that the Iver Johnson Company extended a welcoming hand to nearly all of Rollstone Hill's quarrymen and employed them during the inactive winter months. Iver Johnson paid his employees a decent wage, offered them steady employment, and he was a respected and admired owner. It was not uncommon for his employees to spend their entire working career with the company. More the rule rather than the exception. Workers walked through these security gates and took their positions in their respective shops for 30, 35, 40, and more years at a time. To illustrate this point, Aldrich Meyer of 389 South Street, treasurer of the company, retired in 1973 after spending 66 years with the Iver Johnson Company. A friend of mine in Fitchburg, Don Maynard, told me an interesting story about Mr. Meyer. When Don was in the second or third grade at the Hosmer Elementary School, one of his classmates was Bob Meyer, Aldrich's son. One day, Bob came to school with a box of Iver Johnson red, white, and blue felt beanies and passed them out to all of his classmates. Everyone was just thrilled to death with their new beanies and wore them all day. I hope some of them kept them because they're quite a scarce collector's item today. Frederick, the new company's president, resided at 25 Prospect Street, right here in Fitchburg, just a short walk from the doors of the factory. He was Iver Johnson's oldest, most ambitious, and business-savvy son. He grew up at his father's factory and was well-educated and familiar with its day-to-day operation. He was a bicycle enthusiast and was actively engaged in bicycle racing as a bystander and as a participant. In 1898, he married a wealthy Boston socialite at Trinity Church and lived in his Fitchburg home. Although all of Iver Johnson's sons and one grandson would eventually participate in their father's business at different points in time and with various levels of involvement, Frederick was the one who grew the company enormously. Frederick proved to be a marketing genius for the company, and during his tenure as president, company profits grew tremendously. Between the years 1896 and 1908, the company made profits of over $3 million, just an incredible amount of money at that time. It's interesting to note that although Frederick was a high-profile individual, president of the company, and on several local bank boards, there are no adult pictures of Frederick known to exist. However, it is fairly certain and cautiously believed that this early bicycle club photograph shows Frederick Johnson standing in the front row, second from the right. Frederick wasted no time in expanding the company. In 1896, he issued the company's first catalogs and set his goal to build on the already established retail stores in Fitchburg, Worcester, Boston, and Keene, New Hampshire. In 1900, the Iver Johnson Company purchased the entire wholesale, retail, and real estate holdings of the enormous J.P. Lovell Company in Boston. Iver Johnson Company now owned the company that it once used to distribute its goods. With already established large retail stores in Fitchburg, Worcester, Boston, and Keene, massive wholesale depots in New York, San Francisco, St. Paul, and branches in England, Germany, and Australia, the Iver Johnson Company covered the globe. In 1903, the Iver Johnson Company opened sales offices in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Hamburg, Germany, Paris, London, and Constantinople, Turkey. The Iver Johnson Company grew to be the largest supplier of firearms, bicycles, and sporting goods in the entire world. A new Iver Johnson building was built in Boston in 1908, and no time was wasted making their presence known by flying a huge flag over the downtown building. The J.P. Lovell Arms Company, who once controlled the country's largest share of firearms, bicycle, and sporting goods market, was now history, and the Iver Johnson Company stepped forward as a new world leader in the field. As this historic Boston postcard describes, this new building was built for exclusively and occupied by the Iver Johnson Sporting Goods Company. Always seeking the best, the Iver Johnson building on the corner of Cornwell and Washington Street had the premier location in Boston's retail district. It faced Adams Square, the very heart of Boston's business district. Mrs. Mary Elizabeth Johnson, devastated by her husband's early death, wished to memorialize him in a proper fashion and sought out appropriate ways that she might do so. Rodney Wallace, owner of the Fitchburg Paper Company and close family friend, suggested to Mrs. Johnson that a new building might be a fitting monument to such a great man. Mrs. Johnson was quite receptive to Mr. Wallace's idea and identified a suitable piece of property in a great Main Street location. In 1896, Mrs. Johnson made a cash purchase of the entire Putnam Machine Company property on the corner of Main and Putnam Streets and began a plan for an elaborate building that she would call the Johnsonia. Mrs. Johnson chose a group of high-profile Worcester architects to design the building. It would be built of Indiana sandstone in an Italian Renaissance style. She spared absolutely no expense on her 5-story, state-of-the-art complex of stores, offices, apartments, and a restaurant. The building would have every modern appointment that was available at the time, including elevators, telephone connections, noise-proof floors, and original artwork throughout the building supplied by a Boston firm. When the building was completed in the spring of 1898, Iver Johnson's Sporting Goods Company moved into the corner store. Mrs. Johnson and some of her family relocated to the Johnsonia and made it their home until 1910. The restaurant on the 5th floor of the Johnsonia accommodated 250 diners in a lavishly decorated room with chandeliers and frescoed walls. Extravagant multi-course meals were served on holidays and special occasions. It was the most prominent restaurant for miles around and attracted presidential notables as Teddy Roosevelt during his 1902 visit to Fitchburg and William Howard Taft. In March 1899, Commanding Major General Nelson Miles of the United States Army was given a royal welcome there by the city of Fitchburg. This bowl, complete with the family's crest, is a surviving piece of the Johnsonia china that was once used in their restaurant. Unfortunately, today, the Iver Johnson building, Fitchburg's famous landmark, the Johnsonia, is just a memory. And in its place, a vacant lot. What were we able to salvage from this great and historic structure? Not much that I know of. Even the ornate Iver Johnson building script that graced the front of the building was crumbled by the wrecking ball. Although some may not have seen the value in preserving the building artifacts, others did. An architectural salvage company from New York carefully went through the building and removed many of the irreplaceable architectural details and trucked them away from the city. All this was going on at the time when no one was allowed in the building. There were severe mold issues, as seen in this photograph. The salvage company that removed the building's treasures was selling complete fireplace surrounds, as the one you see here, on eBay, with prices ranging from $3,000 to $5,000. In 1908, Mary Johnson set her sights on building a new home for herself in Lancaster, Massachusetts, that she would call Flowfields. This didn't sit well with some of Mary's sons, as they didn't see the need for such an elaborate home at that time. Frederick brought suit against his mother, contending that he and the Simbleys were entitled to a share of the company's income equally. Mary claimed she was entitled to keep all of the income. A court battle ensued, and the case was settled in Mary's favor in 1913. When Mary died in 1915, she made her displeasure with Frederick very clear in her will. Millions of dollars were divided between her children. Frederick was awarded $1,000. When flow fields were completed in 1910, Mary and some of her family members moved in. Flow Fields was considered to be one of the most up-to-date country estates of its kind in this section of the country. The estate included this modern brick and stucco farmhouse mansion, 2 substantially sized stables, 2 modern caretaker cottages, and several outbuildings. This home, now called the Manor House, is owned by the Perkins School and is used daily. The features of the mansion are a story for another day, but a few I found interesting were these handmade floor tiles that feature the family crest and the company's owl trademark. The owl motif was also used around the fireplaces and outdoor pergolas. Another interesting artifact is the stained glass window on a landing of the main staircase, depicting a woman with outstretched arms, with the inscription, penned by Mrs. Johnson herself, that reads, "My house is yours, my friends throw, whose free opening gates, none comes too early, none departs too late." This painting of Mary, done by artist Henry Eric Christopher Peterson of Stockholm, Sweden, hangs in the mansion's dining room, right next to the painting of Iver, her husband. These paintings were not always the property of the Perkins School. This is the story I was told on the day of my visit. On October 25, 2006, a man by the name of Iver Johnson walked unannounced into the mansion in Lancaster with these 2 paintings. This Iver Johnson was the son of Walter O. Johnson and the grandson of Iver and Mary Johnson. Iver Johnson identified himself to the proper authorities and simply asked if they might like to hang the paintings in the mansion. Without hesitation, his offer was wholeheartedly accepted, and Iver Johnson donated them to the Perkins School. Make no mistake about it, firearms were always Iver Johnson's most lucrative product, and there are simply not enough hours in the day to list all the various styles and models of firearms that were manufactured at the River Street complex. During good times and bad, Iver Johnson firearms were always in demand. The Civil War got Iver Johnson established and on his feet. World War I saw huge increases in production. The Depression of 1932 saw increases in sales as people purchased firearms for personal protection. And the demand for arms during World War II kept the River Street factory busy and on its feet. It was claimed at the time, and never disputed by anyone, that the output of small firearms and shotguns made by the Iver Johnson Arms and Cycle Company was greater in volume than that of all other firearm companies in the country combined. Just as Fitchburg had a share of bicycle clubs, it also supported several firearm clubs. The shooting award ribbon given by the Rollstone Shoots'em Club was one such club that was active in the city in the 1900s. One of Iver Johnson's huge successes was the invention of the safety automatic revolver. It was revolutionary change in the handgun arena at that moment in history. Prior to this time, if you were to carry a revolver with a hammer down on a loaded cylinder, you risked accidental discharge if you dropped the gun or hit the hammer. The Iver Johnson Company patented this safety feature, and Fred's enthusiasm for advertising led him to patent the trademark, the famous Hammer the Hammer slogan, for their firearms. The gun-buying public would long identify the Iver Johnson Safety Automatic Revolver with this slogan, and it was promoted relentlessly worldwide. This is just one example of the hundreds of Hammer the Hammer advertisements produced by the company. The Hammer the Hammer slogan proved to be an incredibly successful marketing tool for the company, and was directly responsible for huge increases in firearm sales and profits. Iver Johnson revolvers were marketed widely and advertised as being absolutely safe. They were so safe that even a little girl could play with one in bed because Papa says it won't hurt us. The Iver Johnson Company ran an entire series of advertisements promoting how safe their revolvers were, showing little girls handling revolvers. Here's another that claims, gentlemen, an Iver Johnson revolver can lie around in the house. The Iver Johnson safety device makes it safe even for children. This kind of advertisement probably wouldn't fly in today's world. I personally think this is one of the nicest looking revolvers that the Iver Johnson Company ever made. It's a simple 22 caliber, 8-shot revolver called the Super Shot Sealed 8. It's a very collectible firearm on the market today. Iver Johnson was also very well known for its shotguns, from single barrel to double barrel in every imaginable gauge and configuration. They were extremely popular firearms. The Champion led the pack and it was the most affordable and most popular shotgun. While this nicely engraved trap gun or skeeter was popular choice of sportsmen participating in recreational and competitive activities. Many of Iver Johnson's handguns, rifles, and shotguns featured the owl, one of the company's long-established trademarks. Occasionally, you hear of Iver Johnson firearm collectors referred as owlheads. It is very well known that the Iver Johnson Company employed many Scandinavian immigrants in their Fitchburg facility. One employee, Oscar Frederick Mossberg, achieved national fame with a successful gun manufacturing business of his own. Mossberg would eventually leave the Iver Johnson Company with his 2 sons and started the O.F. Mossberg's Firearm Company, where they specialized in shotguns. Their name is still very well known in the field. The Iver Johnson Company first started making bicycles in their Fitchburg factory in 1892. This is an extremely rare surviving example of one of Iver Johnson's first bicycles to come out of the Fitchburg facility. This is an 1892 Iver Johnson cushion tire, level diamond, safety bicycle with an English Rove frame in totally original condition. Iver Johnson at one point in time would import Rove frames and steel tubing from England to use in their bicycles. The bicycle frame hadn't changed very much since the late 1800s, when nearly all bicycle manufacturers used the very same diamond-style frame. That all changed instantly when the Iver Johnson Company submitted this patent. The first paragraph says it all. Be it known that I, Frederick Johnson, a citizen of the United States, residing in Fitchburg, in the county of Worcester, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, have invented and produced a new and original design for a bicycle frame. That new and original design would be the famous truss bridge frame. In 1901, Frederick patented a new truss that would set the Iver Johnson bicycle apart from all other manufacturers. This is the actual patent design submitted by Frederick Johnson to the U.S. Patent Office. Frederick modeled the truss bridge bicycle after some of the most magnificent bridges in the country, and again, started a worldwide advertising campaign touting its benefits. The Iver Johnson Company absolutely flooded the bicycle market with hundreds of different advertisements featuring its new Trust the Truss slogan. The company took full advantage of the time it had while holding the patent exclusively. Iver Johnson made a wide selection of different kinds of bicycles. When buying an Iver Johnson track bike in the early 1900s, the best model to buy was the Chatelet model of the Special Racer. These were the most expensive and highest quality racers one could get at that time. There was just nothing better you could buy in its day. This bicycle is probably one of the most original and best surviving examples in the country. However, Iver Johnson made a full line of bicycles, from this very expensive $55 Special Racer to a complete line of children's velocipedes and scooters. This fully loaded and meticulously restored 1931 Iver Johnson Super motorcycle is owned by a local collector. This well-preserved and original 1939 twin-loop roadster is the ladies' answer to the men's Supermo bikes. Most all of the women's bikes had skirt netting near the rear wheels and chain guards to prevent dresses from getting caught in the spokes, in the gears, and the chains. Today, Iver Johnson bicycles are considered to be classics by vintage bicycle collectors, and are considered to be especially pleasing from an aesthetic point of view. Even when new, they were marketed and had the reputation for being very graceful looking, extremely well built, and engineered for performance. There is even an Iver Johnson bicycle on display at the Smithsonian Institute. As mentioned, one of the most noted Iver Johnson models was the truss bridge frame. This picture shows a 1932 Iver Johnson truss bridge roadster at the Iver Johnson complex on River Street. The Iver Johnson Company sponsored Marshall Major Taylor, one of the first superstars of the sport, in 1900 and 1901. This photograph shows Major Taylor on a 1900 Iver Johnson racing bike. Major Taylor won several world-class championships under the Iver Johnson banner and became one of the sport's first superstars. Because of this fame, Iver Johnson racing bikes became sought after by professional racers worldwide. Major Taylor became the nationwide American champion in 1898 and the one-mile track racing champion in 1899 and 1900. Taylor, after setting numerous world records and overcoming widespread racial discrimination, was the first African-American athlete to achieve the level of world champion. But I will say that the Iver Johnson Arms and Cycle Company is one of my biggest and favorite companies in the whole city of Fitchburg. I've been an active collector of the bicycles for 20 years, and we put on a nice show every year at the Fitchburg Historical Society that I hope some of you will be able to check out. Sorry for the technical difficulty, but we've had many today. Thank you.